Welcome to our panel on DeFi regulation. We have.
I can't hear. You guys can't hear us in the back? Oops, sorry. That's much louder.
I'm Scott. Welcome to our panel on DeFi regulation. We have Josh, V, and Jolie. I will let them introduce themselves.
Sounds good. I'm Josh Ephraim, Associate General Counsel at Paradigm, a crypto investment firm.
Hi, I'm V. I'm at Bain Capital Crypto. I lead regulatory and policy there.
Hi, my name is Jolie. I work at Coinbase as a product counsel. I'm working on all things base.
Cool. So we're just going to get started.
Do you want to give your background?
Nah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So first, we're going to talk about a little bit about the SEC and how it works. One thing you may not hear a lot about on Twitter is kind of the SEC rule-making process. It's not just all judges and litigators. And so I guess the first thing is like, what is the SEC rule-making process? How does it work? And why is that important for a good functioning regulatory system?
Yeah, so I can take that one. So, we hear this term regulation by enforcement a lot, and I think, people can mean different things by it, but I think what it's meant to convey is this idea that, in the capital markets, you have some new product or service or offering or activity, and maybe it's not clear how the regulations apply or whether the regulations apply, but instead of an agency like the SEC going through a rulemaking process where they put out a proposed rule. For instance, they could say, we know these crypto tokens are sort of new and different and weird. Maybe the existing securities registration regime doesn't quite work for crypto tokens. So why don't we come up with a new rule for that? So they would put out the rule, the public would then have a chance to comment on it, and then they would decide whether to adopt it. So that's what rulemaking is. As we all know, that is not what the SEC has done. Instead, they've told the industry what they think about crypto through enforcement actions, almost exclusively. So since crypto got on their radar in 2017, they haven't proposed a single rule to address anything in the crypto ecosystem. Instead, they've brought, I think, over 100 enforcement actions by now. So that, I think, is what people mean when they say regulation by enforcement, and that is how the rulemaking process would fit into that if that's the approach that they've chosen to take, which they haven't. So that's how the rulemaking would work.
And does anyone want to talk about why that's good?
I can talk about that a little bit. I think it's obviously helpful for builders in the space to have certainty as to what they're building and what rules they need to play by. I know, that's why I became a lawyer, was to help founders figure out, okay, here are the rules and here's how you can build in this space. Here, we're just kind of stuck guessing because there aren't rules, and the SEC has only regulated by enforcement, which I think there's regulation by enforcement has gotten a lot of criticism, which I think is fair. In theory, sometimes it's nice to not get the rules on the books right away in a nascent industry. You might not know what the rules should be in the first year or two of a new technology. At this point, I think crypto's been around long enough that we're kind of begging for some certainty there. But yeah, we can talk more about that.
Yeah, just from my perspective as not a lawyer, I live in a liberal democracy. I expect the government to do things in ways that are responsive to the people that live under it. And little dictatorships within the federal government are not what our federal government should be about. And I don't see that coming through in how the SEC has approached crypto. But back to being a moderator. Okay, just like off of the SEC, moving kind of on to the Department of Treasury. Can the Department of Treasury regulate DeFi? What sort of things could they do if they wanted? What powers do they have?
So, the SEC and what they do in crypto, I think, does like take up a lot of the oxygen in the room a lot of times. But, what everyone, I think, building in crypto, in DeFi, needs to realize is that the Treasury Department is actually very powerful and probably has a lot of existing authority to crack down on much of the crypto ecosystem. So, obviously we all saw that when OFAC, which is a part of Treasury, sanctioned Tornado Cash. So that's one power that Treasury has to go after crypto and to go after DeFi in particular. There's another department or another unit in Treasury called FinCEN, which is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. And that's the unit in Treasury that they're charged with enforcing the Bank Secrecy Act. And that's the law that governs money services businesses, which are basically just businesses that are engaged in transactions in currency and money, including digital assets, right? So Coinbase and Circle and a lot of these centralized crypto platforms are registered MSBs. And that's why they have to comply with things like KYC. They have to KYC every user. They have to implement all sorts of AML compliance measures like transaction reporting, monitoring, record keeping, things like that. So, Treasury is putting out a report on DeFi either this month or next month that is supposed to make recommendations with respect to DeFi in particular. And it's possible that some of those recommendations could involve those types of requirements on DeFi protocols and applications. So that's something to look out for. And it's possible that they could interpret, their existing authority to do those sorts of things without having to without having to go through Congress to pass new laws.
And just to, if you don't mind jumping in a little bit here, to kind of build on that, why Treasury is so important is that they can cover anything. So even if you are just on the protocol infrastructure level, say that you are running a validator, they can influence whether you can validate transaction that has touched a sanctioned wallet. And these are all instances, and then they can move up the stack. So there's the infrastructure layer, then there's the smart contract level, there's the wallet level, and these are all parts that the Department of Treasury has potentially jurisdiction in providing guidance as to whether KYC information is needed, whether you're considered a money transmitter. And so it's definitely a department that we should all keep an eye out for.
Changing gears a little bit, in DeFi, there's a lot of protocols with no upgradability, no governance. They're just running autonomously on chain. Let's say there was a regulatory requirement or enforcement action against a fully autonomous protocol. What would happen? And are the developers and deployers of those protocols potentially at risk?
I guess so. I don't think there's a simple answer to that. We've seen a few cases like Uki DAO where the DAO has been served or attempted to be served based on just like posting in a chat, which I don't think is actual service for any lawyers in the audience. So I think what happened. Did my mic go out? Oh, here we go. I think what would happen in practice is you serve the DAO. No, developers that are actually working on it would come forward to accept service, and ultimately, there's no one to defend, and it creates a kind of a precedent where you'll get a summary judgment against whatever the autonomous service is for whatever they're doing, and basically everyone's afraid to go work on that service moving forward because they're worried that they'll be liable or served individually as a developer on the protocol.
I agree. I think it's pretty complex. I think there is something to be said. Like if you're just a developer and putting out software, there's a carve out for that kind of activity. But a lot of times in reality and practice it's not just autonomously running. And I think that's a question that a lot of people have to think about is, are we still being able to upgrade smart contracts? Is somebody still governing over the protocol? It's very rare, I think, to just put software out there and then you don't have to do anything about it. I think there's some rare instances where that has happened, but in reality, a lot of projects, you can identify a core team, you can identify maybe a handful of members who are still contributing directly into the protocol, and I think that's where it gets a little bit murky.
So I would point out, though, as like many of you probably know, the developers of Tornado Cash got rid of the admin key, I think, in 2020, right? So at the time they were sanctioned, like 2 years later, no one actually, I mean, those smart contracts, or at least the ones that were sanctioned, actually were autonomous, as far as I understand. So, I mean, they didn't go after the developers, true, but as we know, in the Netherlands, I believe one of the developers is still in jail, and he hasn't been charged yet, which is totally insane, but I think this is the theory that they're going with, right? That he developed this protocol, and even though it is now autonomous, fully autonomous, these smart contracts, and have been for years now, he could still be criminally liable.
Would like U.S. Rights change that at all? Or maybe that's too much. Too deep in the weeds.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's still a really unsettled question of what sorts of criminal or civil liability developers could face. I mean, just going back to UkiDAO, right? Like, they went after the DAO, but they also went out after the founders for their role in developing this protocol that they're now saying is an unregistered or illegal, like, derivatives platform.
Yeah.
So you can definitely be held liable for developing something that is unlawful.
And there's also a pending case in the UK for, I think, what was it called, Tulip Trading Limited, which is basically kind of an unfounded case of someone claiming to be Satoshi Nakamoto and suing Bitcoin Core developers to like give him his keys back. But it's moving forward, and ultimately, if they reach the wrong conclusion in this court case, there could be serious liability for developers working on things like that. So it's kind of scary.
All right, stable coins. Who ultimately decides whether custodial stablecoins are securities, and what types of factors will they look at?
You want to start? I don't have to put you on the spot. I mean, I can go too if you want. No. I think it's a complicated question, but obviously, in the U.S., the SEC is going to look at whether those are securities under Howey, which I think everyone in the audience has probably heard of Howey, which is kind of a sad state that all of you non-lawyers know about this U.S. court case from 1946. But then there's Reeves versus Ernst & Young from, I think, 1990, which talks about a lot of the factors that will be evaluated in a stable coin. Do you want to add on that? Yeah. But yeah, that's all I got.
I was just going to apologize to everyone because you now have to learn a new test, and it's called Reeves. But that could be the test that the SEC applies to go after certain kinds of stable coins. But I don't know what their theory is. I mean, we know because Paxos said that they received a Wells notice from the SEC that their BUSD, the stablecoin that they issue in partnership with Binance, is an unregistered security. I mean, it hasn't been charged yet, so that's one thing. But if the SEC does go after something like BUSD, I think it's important to just take a step back. I know there's a lot of FUD about like what does this mean for stablecoins in general, but I would caution against like reading too much into that, because this could be something that is very specific to just, you know, whatever this like Paxos Binance partnership was with respect to BUSD, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the SEC thinks that all stablecoins or even all centralized custodial stablecoins are securities. I think they would look at a lot of factors, right? Like, you know, does it bear interest? I know most stablecoins don't, but does it bear interest? Either, you know, does the stablecoin issuer give interest on the stablecoin directly, or does it work with an affiliate that gives interest, right? So I could see a theory where they say, you know, Paxos is not giving interest on BUSD, but they have this partnership with Binance, and Binance has this crypto lending program where you can earn interest on BUSD or their pegged version or their wrapped version of it. So I don't know what the theory is going to be, but I think it is going to be, like, you have to look at it very specific to the facts of every situation. I think they would look at, you know, what is the mechanism that the issuer uses to maintain the value of the stablecoin. I think there are a lot of different factors, and yeah, there are a lot of different factors. So it's sort of hard to know what an action against BUSD would mean for all stablecoins.
Okay. Now we're going to move to the layer 2 that has no plans to launch a token network. How is Coinbase approaching decentralization with layer 2s in base? And how will Coinbase, well, let's just do that, yeah.
Hello. Okay, that works. Yes, you're right. We have no plans to launch a token, and we've been very explicit about that. But we are also very cognizant and very dedicated to decentralize, and that is in our commitment to being permissionless. And I think this comes in multiple ways. I know a lot of people have questions about, okay, we're operating a single sequencer. What does that mean? Are you going to freeze funds if you are, I don't know, a bridge operator? And I think like these are all very valid questions, and all questions that we're wrestling with during this testnet phase as we figure out how are we working with the Optimism team to kind of make sure that our decentralization path is in line with theirs. We chose to build on Ethereum for a reason, and that is because we want to have the security of Ethereum, and then also to continue to promote the ethos of decentralization and permissionless all throughout the stack, on the sequencer level, on our smart contract level, and we're working towards it.
Cool. One question just I have is, do you think Base will make maybe the Coinbase user that's never really adventured on chain, do you think Base will make those users more comfortable with self-custody and having control of their private keys? And how is Coinbase, or how are you thinking about that?
That's a really good question, because I think what we're struggling with often, and maybe this is what we're all seeing, is like, what's the real world utility that we can give to users that will make them come on chain? And so at least recently we've seen there's a lot of different dApps experimenting with a lot of things, from NFT to gaming to identity, and these are everything that we want for our users, but we just have no place to put them, because frankly we've thought about how do we bring users on chain, but during the peak of the bull run last year, it was hard. The gas were just crazy. We couldn't comfortably think about putting them into one chain without stressing it, and then just creating a bad experience. But I would say like the key part of bringing users on chain is not just the L2, but it's also our current custodial wallet. So we have all these various wallets that's, if you're not comfortable, like you could come to Coinbase as a retail user, get you used to what these like tickers and what these coins are, and then bring them into on-chain, and that is through whether that's like our MPC wallet, which is you don't have to store you don't have to know your entire seed phrase in order to have one, and you don't have to fear that you can't recover your account. That's another way to start accessing DeFi and dApps, and then once we get you there, maybe we'll then help you bring onto a self-custodial journey through our Coinbase wallet. And so we kind of see all of this as just a part of the journey to bring them on chain.
And then how did the current regulatory environment affect how Coinbase built Base?
It's funny because yesterday we had a team offsite with the Optimism team, and they asked us, what is your top worry? And then it's like regulatory. Those are that's our top three like worries. And I think that's because it's fluid. It's not clear, as we all see. There's we're still trying to figure out what's top of mind for regulators, how will it change in a couple months? That's something that it's always a moving target. And so I think that it's very important as builders to be super flexible and recognizing these are maybe what the regulators are thinking about, then how do we square that with our commitment to decentralization? And one thing I think that came out of this narrative or this team building exercise is that decentralization is super important, but unfortunately a lot of times regulators probably think that decentralization means that we're trying to skirt rules and rule of law. And I think that's not true, and I think a lot of people need to continue and to help spread the message that just because we're committed to decentralization, that means we're going to have better security, we're going to have better experience for users, and it doesn't mean that we're trying to break laws and that we're just trying to go rogue.
Kind of on the regulatory environment and building, have organizations and projects not based in the US become more reluctant to recruit and hire America-based developers? And what are y'all seeing questions around that for teams that might want to pay and employ people that work and live and love the United States?
I can take that as my perspective, working at a VC that's investing in a lot of these projects. I think ultimately the US's regulatory reach is extremely broad. So if you're talking about a project that has absolutely no nexus to the US, period, then I think definitely they're going to be hesitant to hire someone that's based here. I think that fact set is pretty rare because most projects will have, or I don't know about most, but many projects will have either customers in the U.S., people in the U.S., they market in the U.S. There's some relation to the United States. I think you see in the SEC going after Do Kwon, a lot of people would have said he had no nexus, but clearly the SEC is saying there is. This is affecting U.S. users and U.S. citizens, residents. So I think that fact pattern is really unusual, and so probably not a worry if you are based in the U.S. I think you just have to understand that you are subject to the regulatory regimes here. Hopefully that's a good thing because people aren't going to, I think there's a lot of mixed messaging of, hey, okay, maybe if I move the founding team over to Dubai or Panama or some other entity, then I'm protected. The SEC can't go after me. The Department of Justice can't go after me. And that's just probably not true. Maybe it makes it a little bit more difficult to, get a subpoena and make you produce documents subject to that. But I think there's a pretty narrow set of companies that have no, or companies, protocols, whatever, that have no nexus to the U.S.
I'll just
Take a second to switch.
I'll just add to that. I've been in this job since last May, and a big part of what I do at Bain is I advise our portfolio of founders, almost all very early stage projects, and I can say that for the first time since I started, I'm starting to get questions from our founders about should they start thinking about moving abroad, and it's really heartbreaking because we have incredible developers and entrepreneurs in this country, and just the fact that we can't get our act together to create a regulatory environment of certainty and stability for them is just, it's a shame, but it's also inexcusable, especially given the progress that's being made abroad, right? The EU, Japan, South Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, all these other jurisdictions are recognizing the benefits of crypto, and they're trying to come up with a framework. They're not just pursuing the industry and shutting down the industry through enforcement actions and shadow banning and all of this stuff. So it's a shame, and it's really, really disappointing to see. So I don't know if you want to talk about what's going on in Congress. I know, Scott, you're really active, but that's sort of our last hope right now, I think.
Yeah, maybe just a little bit. First, I just want to give a shout out to Tom Emmer and Kristen Gillibrand, also the senator from my home state of Tennessee, Bill Hagerty, who've been sort of championing the crypto cause on the Hill. And I think it's really important that we as a community kind of celebrate and amplify those voices. Because when we do amplify those voices on social media, that validates their decision to kind of take a risk for us. And one other thing, just to because there's people listening, and I don't think this is well known in the crypto community, just because a politician maybe works with someone like Elizabeth Warren on an issue, they may not be actually high conviction anti-crypto. They might just be collaborating on a thing. And when as a community on social media, if we kind of come out and dunk on them very publicly, that sends a message to the staff of that leader and the leader that we don't like them. And what might be kind of a low conviction, feeling it out, maybe they're a little bit skeptical of crypto, that can turn light skepticism into high conviction no. And so I know it's really hard to say, hey, here's how you should behave on Twitter, because it's we don't know all these people. But I think it's important to start thinking about how these decisions are being made to support or oppose crypto, because it isn't necessarily a partisan issue. It doesn't fit neatly within the two-party system of America, and we should not make it that. And that's just kind of my take. I also just wanted to touch Coinbase. As I'm sure we've all seen the pop-ups and notifications about Coinbase getting a little bit more active in grassroots organizing. And I just, maybe Jolie, want to talk a little bit about her perspective on what Coinbase is doing.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely hitting the ground hard on the Hill, and we have recently released Crypto 435. I'm not sure if folks have seen it, but it's our effort to make sure that everybody across all congressional districts have the information they need so that they can go to their legislatures, because we cannot forget that the state governments can also impact crypto directly on the projects that you're working on or operating in, even if you are not headquartered there. And so I highly recommend sign up for Crypto 435, get updates. We'll be giving information and updates about what are key issues that are coming up, who to call, and I think this is all just important information because grassroots organizations and everything like that is like the most powerful tool I think that we have to influence state government. And then it's also up to, I think, industry players like all of us to make sure that we're also trying to push like crypto up at the hill and making sure that legislators understand that where regulation is needed, what should be left for innovation, so that we can, and to make it also open to the public so that it's not just, I think, so as some of us think, it's like just backdoor talks among industry players.
Thank you, everyone. We're at the end of our time. I think we succeeded.
I hope we didn't scare you too much.
Yeah, thanks,
Promises
everyone.
kept.